Okay, so we begin with the third module of our course, which deals with Turing machines, and they were defined by Alan Turing, sometimes called the greatest of all computer scientists, and after him is named the greatest prize of computer science, the Turing Award. Of course, he didn't get it; it was named after him. But you seen the movie, right? Based on his life. We just celebrated 100 years of his birth. So very important person, right? So I want to slightly motivate what Turing did. Now, we covered some of this motivation in the very introductory lecture, and I don't know how many of you had a chance to quickly go through that, but we have considered diverse classes of languages. So we considered, okay, Control Z, let me go to red and thin, and we considered regular languages, right? And then we considered yet wider class of languages called context free languages, right? And then we saw there were languages which were also not context free, such as a raised to n, b raised to n, c raised to n, right? This was not a context free languages. Okay, now, you know of course problems belong to these various classes of languages. For example, defining programming languages, it falls into context free languages. Defining certain kinds of patterns which arise in natural languages, or when you are doing searches, will fall under regular languages, and we'll use regular expressions to define patterns, right? There would be other more complicated languages which will arise in other applications, right? So people have devised diverse computational systems or automata to solve problems which fall under specific regular classes. So for example, regular expressions, for regular languages we define epsilon NFA, right? Which is equivalent to DFA. We defined all these forms of automata to deal with regular languages. For context free languages, what kind of automata did we define? Rani? Can you tell me what kind of automata we use to recognize context-free languages? Hello? I think some problem with your audio. Audio problem. Piyush? Rani, we are just getting buzzing. Yeah. Piyush? He's not there. Naresh? So let me do one thing. At this point, okay. So, yeah. Okay, Piyush is on. Hi, Piyush. No. Okay, Uday?
Yes, sir.
What kind of automata recognize CFL? He just did the theorem. CFL are the languages defined by context-free grammars. And we just showed that context-free grammar were equivalent to push-down automata, right? So I will write PDA here, right? So we had these two kinds of automata that we did, and now for different yet different class of languages, we can define yet another kind of automata, right? So there are many different computational systems that people define, and people were interested in defining more and more powerful computational systems, and in this you could do mechanical calculations arising out of physics or mathematics. So Gödel defined something called primitive recursive functions and mu recursive functions. There are different kind of calculi which were defined, and people tried to give machines which will solve these problems, but there was this abstract question: what problems are mechanically solvable? What are the, nowadays we'll say, what are the problems which can be solved with computers? And instead of having many different kinds of computers or automata to solve different classes of problem, can I have really a very powerful computer which embodies the very essence of mechanical calculation, and it can do whatever any mechanical computer can do. So all mechanically calculatable problems can be solved using that form of computer. So this is a kind of abstract question of defining what is mechanically calculable and constructing a machine for solving them. So the idea is there a most powerful form of machine? We saw PDA were more powerful than DFA. Now we have another kind of automata for this kind of languages. They are called linear bounded automata. We won't do it, but I'm just telling you. This corresponds to linear bound, and they are even more powerful than push down automata, right? So we have DFA, PDA are more powerful, LB are more powerful. We can go on over. But is there a much more powerful machine which is all catching? You know, that was the question. You know, then that is the model that we would want. And then there was this question: if we have a computer which can solve all mechanically calculable problem, are there problems which cannot be solved by it? That means there are problems which cannot be solved by any computer, and it will require other means, you know, some sort of non-computer intelligence to solve them. So logicians, Gödel, Church, Turing, Kleene, Post tried to answer these questions, and they tried to answer these questions much before modern computers were built, right? So, and one of the simplest of such definitions and the most elegant one was given by Alan Turing. Okay, and in doing this, he founded the subject of, you know, study of automata and computers and computability. You know, what can be mechanically calculatable. Things which are mechanically calculatable are also called computable. Okay, so Turing, along with these other people, but you know, central among them is the figure of Turing, founded this science of computability. And then the people ask questions: are there limits to computation? So, to computation, are there problems which cannot be solved by any computer? And we will see answers to some of these in the remaining 3 or 4 lectures that we have. Okay, so what did Turing do that made him so famous? You know, he defined a very simple type of automaton called Turing machine, and we are going to start studying this in today's class. Then he showed that the most existing computing systems, or you know, which may be computation on pen and paper but with mechanical rule like Gödel's mu recursive functions, you know, can be simulated by his Turing machines. So his Turing machines can do what this simple, you know, other more complicated computing systems that other people had defined. In fact, you know, almost all interesting calculation systems which were known were shown to be doable using these very simple machines defined by Turing called Turing machines. You know, maybe Turing machines take more time, they may consume more energy, but it will do the job. So Turing machines seemed rather powerful, you know. And then he gave a philosophical argument that all computing systems, anything that is mechanically calculated, can be simulated by his Turing machine. So he claimed that Turing machines, you know, capture the essence of what is mechanically calculatable. And for seeing this argument, you have to read Turing's paper. You know, this argument is very nicely given. Actually, ideas like this were explored by somebody called Alonzo Church much before Turing. Later Turing, you know, Turing finished all his work on Turing machine, and then he went on to do his PhD under Church, much after doing his most famous work, you know. And PhD was kind of given to him because he had already done so much, you know. So he did something little more and got his PhD. But anyway, so Church had already thought of, you know, a mechanical system, a computational system which he claimed will embody the essence of computation, and all computational systems, you know, can be simulated by Church, but nobody was convinced this was the case. Whereas with Turing's simple machine, it was obvious that it embodied mechanical computation, and he showed that it was all powerful by this philosophical argument. So the thesis today that anything that is mechanically calculatable can be done using Turing's machine is called the Church-Turing thesis, and it is there is no mathematical proof of this, but there is a philosophical argument, and it is a very believable argument. Okay, so in some sense, Church-Turing thesis says that anything that can be done by any computer, now and future, can be done using Turing machines. And the Turing thesis has stood the test of time. No matter, all the modern computers that we have built, including quantum computers, all of them can be actually simulated by Turing machines. So Turing machines, simple machines that we will study, seem to be rather powerful. Okay? Having defined Turing machines, he defined something called a universal Turing machine. That is one standard machine which can mimic other Turing machines. So you don't have to build different Turing machine hardware for different problems. You can build one single Turing machine called universal Turing machine, and you can somehow describe the problem you are trying to solve using Turing machines by giving what is called the code or the program of that you want to follow to the Turing machine. So he made a kind of programmable Turing machine that is called universal Turing machine. Remember, this is much before modern programs. So the whole idea of stored program computers, and programmable machines, arose with the work of Babbage and then with Turing. So we will see the construction of universal Turing machine. And then, as a last step, this universal Turing machine as a result is all powerful as any computer that anybody will build. This one particular Turing machine. It can take code of any other program, code of any program that you want to run, and it will execute that code. So it is like an interpreter for a programming language. So much before we built modern compilers and interpreters, Turing sort of envisioned this in his universal Turing. So I'm just talking in general, giving you an advanced view of what is coming, but he built this universal. And then, since this universal Turing machine embodied the notion of what is mechanically calculable, he showed that there are problems which cannot be solved using Turing machines. So there are limits to what a mechanical computer can do. And he specifically showed that there is a problem called halting problem, which cannot be solved using universal Turing machine and hence using any Turing machine. Right? So no matter how clever you are, you cannot build a computer which will solve the halting problem. In modern language, we will say that the halting problem is undecidable. That is, there does not exist. We'll define this term very precisely, maybe in today's lecture or the next lecture. But there was a much more, this was a problem that Turing created, and he showed that it could not be solved by any computer. There was a well-known problem. There is a logic called first order logic, which is used to describe a lot of mathematics. In fact, Bertrand Russell wrote a series of books called Principia Mathematica, where he wrote down all of the known mathematics at that time using first order logic and set theory, right? And then the question was, the kind of proofs that he gave in that volume, can they be done automatically by a computer? Right? This problem is called the satisfiability or validity problem of first order logic. And a very famous mathematician called Hilbert had said that we should find mechanical systems which will solve first order logic problems. So all of mathematics can be done by computers. What Turing showed was that for finding satisfiability or validity of first order formula also cannot be done by any computer. So this problem is also undecidable. So Hilbert's idea that we can mechanically solve mathematics will not work. That is what Turing proved. So this is just to give you some of the excitement of the era in which Turing and Church and Gödel were living. But this is where his work lives, and what we will do is some of the key elements of this theory. We will be doing undecidability of halting problem. We won't do it first order this thing. We will also not deal with this Church-Turing thesis. But you can read the philosophical argument in his paper. Okay, but let me begin with the topic of Turing machines. So what is it? Let's begin with the study of Turing machines. Any questions so far, even before we begin with Turing machines? Because in some sense, this is the intellectually exciting part of the course. And these machines, simple machines, form the basis of all the advanced computers that we have built after that. And they answer very large questions. Can mathematics be done fully by computers? And a lot of mathematics is being done by computers, but Turing showed that not everything. Okay, that's the idea. So don't worry, we won't have to deal with logic and mathematics and such things. We'll be dealing just with just as we dealt with push down automata and finite state automata, we'll deal with one more class of machines called Turing machines. Is that okay, Arvind? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so we begin with the study of Turing machines. What is a Turing machine? A Turing machine is a machine which has the following thing. It has a finite state control. So the machine can be one, just like push down automata and finite state automata, the machine can be in one of finite number of states, right? Now, what it has is an infinite tape, like the magnetic tape, cassettes which record, digital information on it. The Turing machine has an infinite tape, an unbounded supply of magnetic tape, right? And this tape is divided into cells, and each cell can store a symbol. Okay, so here is a tape, it starts at this position 0, this is called position 0 of the tape, this is cell number 0, and currently it is storing this, we will call this symbol as left hand marker. It is currently storing this left hand marker symbol here. At cell number 1, it is storing this symbol A. At cell number 2, it is storing this symbol B. So it has cells and it is storing, and this funny symbol, no, will be called the blank symbol. So many, in fact, most of the cells will contain the blank symbol, right? But it is also a symbol. So our tape currently contains, the left hand marker, then A, B, B, A, B, A, and then an infinite sequence of blanks. This is what our tape is. And Turing machine has a tape like this. Okay. Now it has a head. The head can be positioned at one of the cells. Currently the head is positioned at this cell numbered 4, right? And the head can read what is the symbol at the current cell. At the head position, what is the symbol? So currently it is reading an A, right? Maybe currently it is in some state called Q and it is reading this letter A. So based on the current state and the current letter being read under the head, the Turing machine can make a move. Okay. And so, what is the move? The move made by the Turing machine is called delta of QA. The transition made by the Turing machine from state Q reading the letter A under its head. Right? This is the thing. And what does this move do? It can do three things. Firstly, it can change state. So from Q it can go to, or let me call this state as P if you don't mind, to be consistent with what is written below. So from state P it can move to state Q. Secondly, it can rewrite, because this tape that it has got is a read-write tape. You can, like a tape recorder can also record under its head, this Turing machine can also record. So what it can do is it can change this A to some other symbol. And in the move made by the Turing machine, we give the symbol which is replaced at the cell. So A is rewritten by some symbol B. That is one of the things that can happen. And you have to specify rules like this in your transitions. So this transition says, on reading an A, if you are in state P and you are reading A, then you change to state Q, also change the symbol at the current cell to B, and then what you can do is you can move the head one position to the right or one position to the left. That is, you can move to position 3 or you can move to position 5. So your move can be either you can move right one step or you can move left one step. So the transition will look like this. So is the idea of Turing machine very clear? That it has an infinite tape divided into cells. The leftmost symbol on the tape at the initial cell is always this left hand marker. So that delimits the beginning of the tape. This symbol marks the beginning of the tape. And then at every cell there are letters, but only finitely many of these cells will contain letters other than blank. And then there will be infinitely many cells, following cells, which will contain blank. It is possible that you may have a configuration which looks like this: A, then a blank, then a B, and C, and then an infinite sequence of blanks. That is possible. So blanks can occur even in the middle, but the trailing part of this infinite tape will contain infinitely many blanks only. Okay, so is the idea of tape clear? And what can the Turing machine do? It can be in one of finitely many states. It has a head which is positioned at a cell, and depending on the current state and the symbol being read under the head, it can make a move. In the move, it can change the state. It can rewrite the symbol at the current cell by some other symbol, or maybe the same symbol. It may keep it same, and then it can move the head one step to the left or one step to the right. This is what a Turing machine can do. So a transition will look like this. That is, delta of PA will consist of the next state Q, the symbol to be written at the current cell B, and the direction in which you move, left or right. This is a Turing machine. Okay? This simple machine that Turing defined, he claimed, can do anything under the earth. Anything that is mechanically calculatable can be done by this machine. So, it was a very startling idea, which is why, Turing is called the greatest of computer scientists, right? So
Is it compulsory to move left or right after during a transition?
There are variations on Turing machines. In some Turing machines, you have three kinds of directions: L, stay where you are, or move to the right. There are three kinds of directions, right? D, but in the simple definition, you can move one step to the left or one step to the right only. You can mimic staying at the same place by first moving one step to the left, and then, coming back to the current position by moving one step to the right without changing this symbol. So, point is, you can give many modifications to these Turing machines, but there is a topic on Turing machine which we will do in the next class. It is called robustness. That is, no matter how you change the definition of Turing machines, it seems to remain equally powerful. You can mimic this more sophisticated Turing machine by the simple machine that Turing defined. So it is compulsory to move left or right in the simple definition that we have given. Okay. But you can define more complicated Turing machines, and you will find that it will not add power. Of course, it will add convenience. Okay? And we are going to see many other kinds of Turing machines which are more convenient. Okay? But we will also show that they are no more powerful than this simple Turing machine. So this is called robustness of Turing machine. Okay? So good question. Okay, but you understood what is Turing machine. So I have described here, it is this infinite tape divided in cells. The cell number 0 will always be written with this left hand marker symbol, and the rest of the symbols come from now all the symbols on the tape come from something called the tape alphabet, which will be denoted by gamma. Just as we had stack alphabet, we have tape alphabet, and just as we had this and the input words that you are trying to recognize comes from an alphabet called sigma. This will be a subset of gamma, right? So tape alphabet is always larger than the input alphabet. In particular, the tape alphabet will contain this left hand marker symbol. So is the idea of tape and what is written on the tape clear to you, and the nature of the transition? Next, the head is positioned at a cell, and the cell can read the content, and it can also write a new symbol under the head. And the move I have already described. So this is the description, informal description of the Turing machine. Okay. Formally, what is the Turing machine? It looks big. It is a 9 tuple. But don't get intimidated. It's a very simple idea. It has a finite set of states. Then you have to give it the word that you are trying to accept or reject, right, using the automaton. So that word comes from the input alphabet sigma. So this is finite set of states Q. Then we have the input alphabet. This is just like finite state automata. Okay. Now instead of having, in this Q there are 3 specific states. There is a start state, just like push down automata or finite automata. There is the start state S. There is a single final state or accepting state called T. So in finite state automata, we had a subset of Q which was finite, but here it is enough to have a single final state, and that will turn out to be as powerful. So we have these three specific states within Q, one called start state, one called an accepting state, and one called a rejecting state. And Turing machine will make moves, and when it winds up in the accepting state, you will have an accepting run, and so you will accept the initial word on which it started. Similarly, if it winds up in the rejecting state, you will reject the word, right? So you got this three state S, T, and R inside Q. Is this part clear? So far you have finite set of states, the input alphabet, and three distinguished states, the start state, the accept state, and the reject state. And of course the accept and reject should be different. This is there so far. We also have the tape alphabet. So symbols on the tape come from this gamma, and gamma is a superset of sigma. So initially the word to be recognized will be written on the tape, but then as Turing machine works, it will keep changing the symbols, and with symbols which come out of gamma, till it reaches this accepting state or rejecting state, right? There is also the blank symbol. So there is a distinguished symbol called the blank symbol. Okay, and most of the tape will be blank. Okay, there is also the left end marker symbol. And why do we need this blank and left end marker symbol? Because our tape will typically look like this. It will have the left end marker symbol, then it will have some useful symbols which we use in calculation. This may have some blanks inside, but then the rest of the tape will consist of an infinite sequence of blanks. This is what you can call as scratch memory. And sometimes the Turing machine can go to the right part, acquire some extra cells, where it can write some things, and so it can keep drawing from the scratch memory by using more and more part of this infinite tape, right? That is the idea, which is why we have this notion of blank cells. Okay, and blank cells are the cells containing the blank symbol. So is the to be very precise, all these are defined. So that, and then there are this set of transitions where transitions look like this, right? They are given as this. Each transition takes two arguments, the current state and the current letter, and it returns three things: the next state, the letter to be rewritten, and the direction in which you move. So a transition basically is a function from current state and the current tape symbol that you are reading under the cell to the next state, the rewritten tape symbol, and the direction of movement. So it's a function like this. And here we are defining what are called deterministic one tape Turing machines. Okay. So we are defining deterministic one tape Turing machines, which is why this is a total function. This is how formal definition of a Turing machine. So in summary, a Turing machine consists of these 9 components, but most of them are very simple, and they are given in this diagram. So Q is the finite set of states. Sigma is the input alphabet from which the word comes. Gamma is the tape alphabet. There is the left hand marker symbol. There is the blank symbol. There is a start state, accepting state, rejecting state, and delta is a finite set of transition rules where each rule looks like this, right? So you will give a list of such rules. Okay, and that is your Turing machine. Now there are some useful, there are some well-formedness condition. Your transition function delta should be well formed. Suppose, okay, before that let me explain one idea. Okay, before that let me explain one idea. How did this? Okay, what is this initial? What is the configuration of a Turing machine? A configuration of a Turing machine is something like this, right? So what is the current configuration? You have to know what is the current state in which you are there. So you write down the current state, then you write down what is the current content of the whole infinite tape. So the tape will take the following tape symbol. There will be the left hand marker symbol, then there will be some string called gamma, right? And this gamma will contain, will be a sequence, it will belong to, sorry, not gamma, it will contain some string called y, right? And y will belong to gamma star. The tape, it's some finite word over the tape symbols. and this will be followed by blank occurring infinitely. So the trailing part will consist of blank occurring infinitely after this y, and that is written as this bottom to the power omega. Bottom to the power omega means infinite sequence of blanks. So my tape will always look like turnstile followed by the left hand marker, followed by some finite sequence of tape symbols, followed by an infinite sequence of blanks, right? This is how my tape will look like. Is that clear? You know what the tape will contain at any point. So I think I described this as this. My initial tape will contain what? Oh, there is a mistake here. This should be left hand marker x and then bottom raised to omega. That is, how do we start the Turing machine? We start the Turing machine by first putting the left hand marker and the word that we want to recognize, the input word that we want to recognize, we put after the end marker. And this is followed by an infinite sequence of blanks. So suppose we were trying to recognize a raised to n, b raised to n, and the input word is a, b, b. Then on the tape we will put left hand marker followed by a, b, b, and then an infinite sequence of blanks. Right? This is what my tape will contain initially. So is the idea of how the problem is, the word is given to the Turing machine clear? We just put the left hand marker followed by the word, and then there will be this sequence of blanks. This is the initial tape. So for any given input word x, the initial tape looks like this. Is the idea of the initial tape clear to you? So for any problem, you must give the problem to the Turing machine by putting it on the tape, which will look like this. So suppose we were trying to recognize left bracket, right bracket under the balance parenthesis, and this may fail. What would we put on the tape? Can somebody tell me? So Piyush, what will I put on the tape if this is the word I am trying to recognize? Piyush is there? If Piyush is not there, can Parth tell me if this is the word I am trying to recognize? What should I put on the tape? Hello, Parth? I seem to have lost Parth. Anybody is there? Hello, students.
We can put the first left marker symbol, then the word, and then an infinite number of bottom symbols.
And then all the bottoms, sequence of bottom. This is how you give input to the Turing machine, right? That's clear to you? And what is the, what Turing machine will do is, it will do some processing. Maybe the head will come here. It will replace this by some symbol called capital A, which is a tape symbol but not an input symbol. So the tape may contain left bracket A, and the head may have moved here, after this an A, and then the right bracket, and then blank, 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 and the head will be somewhere here, right? Okay, so my tape will contain, again a left, current tape will contain the left end marker, and then, some finite word coming from gamma followed by infinite sequence of blanks, right? So what would be the current configuration of my Turing machine, which is like this after having done some number of moves? The configuration will tell you what is the current state, what is the current tape, and where is the head. So it will consist of three things. My configuration will consist of the current state, what is the current state of the automaton, which of the finite states it's in, what is the current content of the tape, which will look like this, right? And the current head position, right? So here there should be a turnstile. I don't know why I missed it, right? So configuration will be a 3 tuple, which will look like this is my current state of the of the Turing machine. What is the content of the tape? Which will be of the form left bracket followed by some tape symbol word, tape alphabet word, followed by infinite sequence of blanks, and the position of the head, which will be some number. So the tape cells are counted from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this it will say I am at the position 3, right? So for example, this configuration that we had here, I can write it. How can I write? Suppose currently it is in some state called P. Then what will be my configuration? My configuration will look like this. I am in state P and the current content of the tape is what? So since Arvind is audible, Arvind, what is the current tape? How should I write it? So I have to write three things.
So the current state is in A. I mean, current state is P. Current
tape is what? So I'll write tape in blue. Current tape contains bottom followed by A, B, right? A, B, B, A, B, B, A, B, A, followed by this blank raised to omega, right? Okay. And then where is the head? So head is, this is position 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So head is at position 4. And this defines the current configuration in which my Turing machine is. So is the notion of configuration clear to you?
Yes, sir.
Uday, configuration clear to you? This is the configuration of the Turing machine. Okay, so study this. We'll see this again. I'm going to stop very soon. So my configuration is these three things: the current state, the current tape, and the position of the head. Okay, that defines my current configuration. What is the initial configuration? We already saw this. We are in the start state because my Turing machine specifies which state is the start state. Then I have this initial tape which consists of left end marker followed by the input word X. So initial configuration on input X is followed by blank, and initially my head is pointing at the leftmost cell, which is actually contains this left end marker. So my head position is 0. This is the initial configuration of the Turing machine. But a general configuration will look like this. Okay, and from such a configuration, the Turing machine will make moves. It will keep changing configurations. It will go to some other state, P with some other omega. Maybe it is at position 2, and it will keep making moves like that. Initially, of course, from 0 it can only go to 1, but then in the next move it will go to 2, etc. And by doing a sequence of moves, the Turing machine may wind up in a configuration that we call as a terminal configuration. What is a terminal configuration? A terminal configuration is a configuration where it has reached the state T. In that case, the configuration is called an accepting configuration. So after moving through a number of configurations, the Turing machine may wind up into an accepting configuration, where the tape currently contains some Z, which I don't care, and head position may be at some I, but basically the state is T, which means I have reached the accepting state, and hence the initial word which I started I will accept, or I may wind up in the R state, which is called the rejecting configuration. So it is possible that the Turing machine, by making a number of moves, may wind up into a configuration which looks like this or which looks like this. So these are called accepting configurations or rejecting configurations, and together they are called terminal configurations. Okay, so I just defined some terminology. And next, I need to define what is one step of move of the Turing machine. So given a rule like this, how does a configuration change to the next configuration? So I have to define one step move from configuration alpha to configuration beta. Okay, so some configuration of Turing machine, given a rule like this, how does it change to beta? That is what I have to define, and I will do that next time, although the definition is on the slides. So what I will do is I will end here today. Please study this part of the Turing machines. Okay, I will repeat what we did today very quickly in the next class, but we will continue with the description of the Turing machines. I wanted to do a little more. Logical step would have been to finish this definition of what the Turing machine does in one step move, but let us do that next time. Okay. So you are getting some flavor of what the Turing machine does. Okay. Not really, because I have not done any useful computation using Turing machine so far, right? But You know, one kind of Turing machine looks like this. Let me describe it informally to you. You are trying to accept a word X which is defined by this regular expression. That is words in which there is alphabet is of course AB. Okay, and we are trying to accept those words which contain at least one B. So what the Turing machine will do is, it has three states, S, T and R, and what it will do is, starting in state S, it will keep scanning to the right. So whenever, so it will, whether it sees the left turnstile or it sees this thing, it will write the same symbol back. Okay, I think I should do this next time. The time has run out. Okay, so let's stop here today, and then we will continue next time with the description of Turing machines. So any questions so far? Please study these slides. I'll put them up right away. Okay. If there are no questions, then what I will do is I will stop recording.